Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Kathleen Rourke, Executive Director of Educational Sales and Marketing at Candlewick Press, and I am so excited for tonight's conversation with the incredibly talented Eric Velasquez, who has illustrated more than 30 children's books and whose many awards include a Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award for New Talent, an NAACP Image Award, and a Pura Belpré Award for illustration. His first book with Candlewick Press, Schomburg, The Man Who Built a Library by Carol Boston Weatherford, received 5-starred reviews and multiple accolades. His most recent book with Candlewick is the gorgeous Mambo Mucho Mambo, The Dance That Crossed Color Lines by Dean Robbins. School Library Journal, in a starred review, said, Velasquez's illustrations send sparks flying off each full lead spread. I now turn the conversation over to Eric and the incomparable Sonja Cherry-Paul, Director of Diversity and Equity at Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. We invite you to use the comments section to ask questions. Thank you and enjoy the conversation.
Eric, how are you? Thank you so much for being on the Black Creator Series.
Thank you for having me as part of the Black Creator Series. It's quite an honor.
Oh, so I want to jump in and talk about your love of art, your love of creating. Was there a particular moment or experience that sparked this love, Eric?
Well, not one moment. See, I've been making art a long time. My mom would come home with a lot of art supplies, and she kept me really well supplied with the watercolors and pencils, colored pencils. So there was never a time that I can remember that I wasn't making art. This has been who I am for a long, long time.
And I'm wondering, you talk about your mom supplying you with all of these materials. And I'm thinking about in school where art is often designated to a separate class at a specific time during the week. In many cases, it's certainly not every day, but like maybe once per week or once every other week. Were there any ways that teachers nurtured your talent in elementary school and middle school? What's important for educators to know about encouraging and nurturing students as artists the way your mom did?
Well, that's actually a really good question. So I would say that depending on the exposure, a young creative may not be as advanced as other students. So what I would say is that to be on the lookout for a natural sense of curiosity and an ability to apply and grasp new ideas and incorporate them into their current projects. And I say that because there are other students that might seem to be more advanced in their abilities to pretty much copy what they see. And it's not necessarily an indicator of having, let's say, a creative sense. I remember early on, my artwork was it was not exceptional and it was not good at all. But because of really good art teachers that nurtured me and saw something in me, I was able to continue to develop as an artist. They would allow me a little more flexibility and freedom, sometimes not even having to do the class projects that everyone else was doing. And that really made me feel special, which was interesting because there were kids that could actually draw better than I could. But for some reason, I was afforded these privileges.
Wow. That's really, really powerful. And also something you said about teachers, allowing kids to incorporate their ideas into the projects that they're doing. So even if you're not an art teacher, if you're a classroom teacher teaching science or social studies or language arts, that invitation, right, is essential for kids to have access and opportunity to apply their artistic talents to the work that they're doing. Eric, I was reading one of your books, and on the book blurb, it said that you're from Harlem, New York. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how does this background influence you as a creator? I ask these questions as I am especially thinking about your Pura Belpre award-winning book, Grandma's Gift. In what ways do you tap into your identities, your racial, your cultural identities, your background to create?
Well, I would be the first to say that my identity and my background are at the very core of my creativity. The books that I've written are based in the old-fashioned African tradition of just the oral storytelling. Those stories are all born out of just stories that I'm sharing with friends and with families. And then in the case of Octopus Stew is like a story that my dad would tell over and over again to all my friends, and in a very embarrassing way. And it was I kind of an inside joke between me and him, where I kind of flipped the script on the story. But it's all based on just the idea of sharing stories, which I fear that we might be losing, people gathering together and just sharing ideas and stories. Nowadays, when I go to, let's say, a family gathering, I notice everyone's on their phone and not really interacting much with each other. And what a pity, because so many stories are being lost right there at that moment, that we could all be sharing, just ideas and stories.
Yeah.
So very important.
I am just, thank you for mentioning Octopus Stew and Grandma's Gift. And, certainly we can see that elevation of oral storytelling across your brilliant body of work, Eric, and that's really important, I think, for educators to hear, because often there is a glorification of the written word. And this oral storytelling can be a way for children to bring their ideas and their talents to the page. If as educators we tap into that. I remember meeting you years ago when I was a classroom teacher, and the committee I co-founded organized a multicultural book fair. And it was right before Schomburg, The Man Who Built a Library, written by the incredible Carol Boston Weatherford, was published. But you so generously gave an expert and in-depth history lesson for all of us about Schomburg and his impact. And being from Harlem, did you already know a lot about Arturo Schomburg prior to working on this stunning book? What kind of research did you do? Was there anything that surprised you?
Okay, so that's a big question there. Yeah. So it was my idea to do the book, and I pitched the notion to Carol Boston Weatherford, the great Carol Boston Weatherford, and she agreed to write the manuscript for me. So I became aware of Arturo Schomburg in the 3rd grade. There was this poster of him in my 3rd grade class that I would stare at all the time. And one day my teacher, Miss Holmes, said, you have a lot in common with that man. And I was really surprised to hear that, but I had no idea what she was about to say. And she said, that man and your family both come from Puerto Rico. So I asked my grandmother when I got home if she was aware of Arturo Schomburg, and she said, yes. Ese hombre era un genio. That man was a genius. But what made him a genius? And she really didn't say much, but I always held him in a very high, esteem. And in 2006, went to the Schomburg Center to see a performance of The Last Poets with my wife and her friend Sheena. And I remember being in the bookstore when my wife's friend says, there are no children's books on Arturo Schomburg. It's something you should think about. And so I did some research then and was fascinated by his life and all the things that he discovered. He literally brought, Black history out of the shadows that, figures that we celebrate to this day had already faded into obscurity. And he was really responsible for bringing them out of obscurity. So I was like, I'm all in. So I contacted Carol immediately, and she's like, oh my God, I've always wondered about Schomburg. I've spent a lot of hours at the Schomburg Center.
Yeah.
it's something I would be into. And so she wrote the manuscript. It wasn't easy though. It took 10 years to get it published, but
Wow.
perseverance.
Oh my goodness. And so glad that you persevered and triumphed. It is gorgeous and brilliant. And I have to tell you, you learned about him in third grade. It was not until I was maybe 18, 19 that I understood him to be a real person. So
Yeah.
it is so incredibly necessary that this book is in children's hands, in classrooms, and that teachers are teaching about him. Could you talk to us a little bit about mediums you use as an artist? How do you decide what to use for a particular project? How'd you make this book?
Well, so the Schomburg book is oil on paper. And I normally, that's usually my preferred medium, although I've worked in different media. I've used pastel and charcoal, and most recently watercolor on the Shirley Chisholm book. But these paintings were all done using oil paint on paper. And I did spend a lot of time at the Schomburg Center doing all the research there. I was really surprised by how many photos there were, of Arturo Schomburg, because like when you look online, there are not that many. But yeah, he documented most of his life, and he came in contact with a lot of people. So I know I kind of strayed from the question there, but he's just such a fascinating character. And I call that book The Gift That Keeps on Giving, because you keep discovering, other characters from history. Yeah, the other thing I discovered in that Schomburg book while working on it was Nicolas Guillem, the Cuban poet, which I didn't know who he was. And looking through all the photos, there were photos of him that he had sent to Schomburg. And in researching him, Nicolas Guillem was basically the Cuban Langston Hughes. Schomburg introduced Nicolas Guillem to Langston Hughes during the Harlem Renaissance. And basically, Langston Hughes composed his poetry to the American blues, and Nicolas Guillem composed his poetry to El Son Cubano, the Cuban song. And so he had this ability to just basically take the dialects of the Afro-Cuban as well as African folklore, melt that together to forge this movement called Poesía Negra in Cuba. And those two men, Langston Hughes and Nicolas Guillem, kept corresponding pretty much for the remainder of, let's say, Langston Hughes' life. It's really fascinating. And to even cap it, to show you how much of a history buff I've become with this project. I listen to a lot of modern day Cuban music, and a lot of it quotes Nicolas Guillem's poetry. I had no clue. So when I started reading some of his poetry, I'm like, oh my goodness, I know this. I know, because they drop it in all throughout the music. So just fascinating. That project really was like a special project for me. I mean, it's like I said, the gift that keeps on giving, because I continue to learn from it.
And he wasn't simply curating books and art, he was curating stories and histories and the lived experiences of Black people that accurately represented their accomplishments, their full humanity.
The other thing he did was get artists and writers together in a communal space. Would bring them to the library and let them interact with each other, which is something, that we, when you see like an artist or a writer come to a library and give a talk, all of that might have started with him, because he saw the library as more than just a place to house books, but an extension of the community and a way of getting artists and writers together and let them interact and create more art. So
yeah. Thank you for mentioning that too, because I think that's so important for kids, in a technology rich world where everything that they think they need is at their fingertips, to spotlight the importance of being at the library and coming together and how powerful that is and important. Let's talk about one of your new books, Mambo Mucho Mambo, the dance that crossed the color lines. And this is written by Dean Robbins. The setting of this book is Spanish Harlem, right? And you're from Harlem. What will young readers learn about Spanish Harlem, specifically Latin jazz and dancing the mambo, and anything else? What will they learn as they enjoy this book?
Well, what I hope that they learn is that Spanish Harlem was a place and continues to be a place that's alive and rich with music and culture and food. And I also hope that the children come away with a love of Afro-Cuban jazz, and particularly Machito and his Afro-Cubans and how important they were to the music. There's Millie dancing, and there's Pedro. But yeah, the richness of just that place. And then also of the Palladium that really was the place where a lot of musicians came to play. And of course is the place that broke the color line, because people loved the music so much, they were able to put certain things aside, which is really interesting. Think about it.
Yeah. And we've been, again, talking about how, as a creator, one's identities and backgrounds become this rich source of a place for you to tap into, to tell the stories, to create the stories. I'm wondering, do you have any connection to the Palladium, to what kind of inside stories can you share that kids will be fascinated to know about?
Okay. Well, I could say that I probably wouldn't exist had it not been for the Palladium, because my parents met at the Palladium.
Oh, see,
right.
I knew there would be something there. Tell us about that.
And what was interesting is that I remember my dad sharing once again the story about the night he met my mom, saying that, he had seen the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and he followed her out when she was leaving, and my mom was taking a cab to go home, and he was there with his two friends, and he talked her into taking the subway, that they would give her a personal escort to her front door via subway. But so I grew up with all these rich stories about the Palladium and the different bands and their performances and how extraordinary they were and spectacular. Not just Machito, which my dad also loved, but Cortijo, which I mentioned in Grandma's Records, and as well as other bands, that all came to the Palladium and met there. Fantastic. Kind of missed out on that era, since I love, Latin music as well. I inherited that from my parents, and it sounded like a really special place, and I wanted to sort of capture the feeling based on the stories that I grew up hearing, what a kind of magical place it was. I think people were able to be themselves. And then once they left there, resumed their regular American life of the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
I noticed with both these titles, Schomburg and Mambo Mucho Mambo, they are both printed in Spanish and in English. That is no small thing, because oftentimes I think educators might come across a book that is bilingual, but you can actually get both of those titles, and tell me if there are others of yours in Spanish. And I want you to talk about the importance of that, the significance of that. What does it say to readers, to children, when a book is printed completely in Spanish, rather than Spanish having to share the page with English?
Well, that's very important, actually, and more so now that we're getting so many people from different Latin American countries. The validation of just seeing the book in Spanish and having their parents read it that might not read in English. I know for many years my grandmother didn't read anything in English, and it was much later in life that she began reading in English. And as a child, I remember at one point even thinking, oh, maybe my grandma can't read. But then she would read, the Spanish-speaking newspaper and devour that, and it's like, okay, well, but the idea that that the family can share the book, is very special because, even 20 years ago, this was not really a thing. And fortunately, Grandma's Records, Grandma's Gift, and Octopus Stew are all also available in Spanish, as well as Mambo Mucho Mambo and Schomburg, El Hombre que Construyó una Biblioteca. I'm very, very proud of these things. And as I teach at FIT and I come in contact with a lot of my students that are coming from Honduras, Guatemala, as well as Mexico, and other countries throughout South America, it's thrilling for me that I can share these these books with them. So it's important. And just being able to, it's kind of like once they see themselves in the pages, that's half the battle right there.
Mm-hmm. It is a powerful, powerful affirmation, Eric. It's a reminder to me, of the importance of children accessing authentic representations of language. So I want to just encourage educators, buy the book in English, also buy the book in Spanish, because we want all kids to feel affirmed and seen and loved and that they matter, right?
Yes.
Illustrator Michaela Goad became the first not white woman to win the Caldecott in its 83-year history, right? So we could go on a long conversation around that, right? But during her acceptance speech, when asked about illustrating the book that won that award, Water Protectors, We Are Water Protectors, she said, "I didn't dive in lightly. As I do with every story that crosses my path, I asked if I was the right artist for the job. Does my own lived experience resonate with the story? Will I be able to authentically center Indigenous children? Ultimately, will I do harm by taking this story on?" And she said that she asks herself these questions because to be Indigenous is to know injustice, erasure, and misrepresentation. And I'm wondering, are there any questions you ask of yourself before taking on the enormity of illustrating a book for children?
Yeah, actually, there are lots of questions I ask myself. And one is, that I think is very important. What can I bring to this project? And what do I want to say with this project? And is it going to be authentic? And I for a long time, I've prided myself on the fact that I do a lot of research for these books. And also let's say the lived experience and what personal connection might I have to the book, the story that I'm trying to illustrate. But these are actually very, let's say, deep and personal moments that I think every illustrator goes through, especially those of us that really care a lot about the work that we're doing. Bringing a sense of authenticity to the project is really, really important. And, it's not something that every illustrator, let's say, shares, but those of us that kind of feel deeply about these things, it's not something we take lightly, and I've turned down a few projects because I felt that there was nothing that I can bring to it, or that there've already been a book on this particular subject that pretty much captured it all. So like I said, it's something that we take very, very seriously.
And I so appreciate you sharing that because, I think about so many books that have caused harm because they have been misrepresentation of Black and Brown, communities. And I just, I wanted people to hear, first of all, the importance of of there being more Black and brown illustrators, right? We need you. And to also understand that when you're picking up a book, and a person is illustrating that story, it's important for us as consumers and educators to really think about these kinds of questions that you ask yourself. What is this person bringing to the project? What kind of research and authenticity, and as you said, personal connection and lived experiences are they able to gift us with this project? And I think that's really powerful to teach kids to look for as well, to really think about that. In just 1 year in this country, we've gone from a let's buy all of the Black books approach in response to continued police brutality and systemic racism to let's ban all of the Black books, right? And we see this playing out in schools across the country. What are your thoughts about book censorship and book banning? What concerns do you have about the impact on this? Of course, on creators, but also on young readers.
Well, once again, it's something I take very seriously. It's the books that are being banned. Some of them deal with the civil rights movement and the African American experience, and the idea that those books are being taken away from certain communities, and depriving the children of these stories and these connections. It's really a sad situation, I think, and it's one for concern. So there's a lot of let's say fears that I have, and that how this can impact the future. So it's something that I'm hoping that we can reverse.
I feel very encouraged because there are so many educators who really do recognize that without truth, right, not just representation, but without truth, we really cannot heal. The wounds of this country cannot heal. And they are really, taking measures to make sure that they are being truth tellers in the classroom, and that that kids are having access to incredible books. So there is a lot of dedication on the part of educators to push back against this kind of resistance.
Yeah, and I admire those efforts. I really do. It shows true courage.
So Eric, let's talk a little bit about what's now and next. Is there anything that you're working on that you can share with us? What can young readers look forward to?
Well, I'm very excited about the projects that I'm currently working on. So I'm here in my studio, and my studio is actually abuzz with excitement. I'm working on another big book for Candlewick, on a larger than life figure who I cannot mention, but historical figure that made a big impact in the world. And I'm also working on a project that I've written, and I'm in the process of illustrating it. So, which I also can't mention the title.
All right, y'all. I tried.
Top secret stuff going on in here.
I'm trying to find all about all of it, but we will just make sure to keep looking for the announcement, so that we can get our hands on those next projects coming up.
Absolutely.
So to look across your brilliant body of work is to recognize how teachers, how educators can lean into the art and words of your books in ways where the world can open wider for children. And from that wider view, so many children receive the gift of your work, which is a gift of being able to marvel at a reflection of themselves in a way that's affirming and beautiful, and also the gift of being able to gain a greater sense of their humanity. What does it mean to you to be a Black creator?
Wow, that's a big question. Okay, so I would like to think a Black creator is an authentic voice that's centered in Africanism. And that's including the African American experience, as well as the Afro-Latino experience and the Afro-Caribbean experience. The notion of the authentic voice, it's simple in saying it, but yet very complex. There's a big difference when the voice is authentic as opposed to when it's not. And I see that in the connection when the kids sort of not just see themselves, but even if the story, let's say, takes place in their neighborhood and they're able to recognize like that particular street corner or something like that. That's very special. And growing up, I was afforded a little bit of that. And just being able to share that with kids, to me, is basically the joy of my life. So a very important notion. Yeah, the notion of the Black creator.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. It's been a pleasure to spend time talking to you about your work, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me to spend a little time chatting with you about my books. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation and can take this new knowledge back to your classrooms. Please join us in January for a conversation with elite athlete and debut author Zion Clark. For a full schedule of conversations, please visit blackcreatorseries.candlewick.com.